Assalamu alaikum. My name is Qasim Shehzad. Today lecture is about engineering mechanics. This is experiment number 4 of engineering mechanics lab, in which we have to find the coefficient of friction. So what is coefficient of friction? Two surfaces are in contact, and between these two surfaces, when the roughness is interlocked, when two surfaces are come close to each other or come in contact with each other, so the roughness is produced between these two surfaces when they are moved over each other. Like this is the surface and this is another body. So when this body have to move over this surface, so they must have to overcome this friction force of the surface. The friction force that is produced between the object and the surface, so this is called friction force. And the force we applied, so the force we applied must overcome to the frictional force. What is frictional force? Force that opposes the moment or tendency of movement. What is force? According to the definition of force, what is force? Force is the ability to which a body tends to move or stop or tend to stop. So frictional force that opposes the movement or tendency of movement. This means that frictional force are that force which opposes the object movement that is due to the applied force. Due to applied force, when the object is moved, so this movement is opposes by a force, and this force is called frictional force. Now frictional force is a vector quantity. It's have a magnitude and direction also. Frictional force have a vector quantity, it's have magnitude and direction. So its direction is always opposite to the force of movement. The direction of frictional force is always opposite to the applied force. Let let that this is the applied force. This force is the applied force. So frictional force is always opposite to this applied force. So frictional force is in this direction. So this is the frictional force. In case number 1, we study a case of static friction, that when object does not move, just like when the frictional force is equal to applied force. This means that when we applied a force, when we push an object, so this applied force have to be overcome by a frictional force. So frictional force is opposite to this applied force, this pushness force. So when this applied force is equal to frictional force, it means that how many force when we applied on this object to move, so that force will be applied by the friction. These tools are equal, so the body is in static position, the body is in the rest when the applied force and the frictional force are equal. When the applied and the frictional force are equal in magnitude but opposite in direction, these applied force and frictional force are equal in magnitude and opposite in direction, then the object does not move. But this condition is up to certain limit. When the applied force increases up to a certain limit, then the body have to start the movement. So the position or the point at which the applied force have to increase, and this increasement can start the motion of that object. So this position or this point is called verge point or verge position. Let at this position, when frictional force is equal to applied force, summation of fx is equal to 0. It's mean that summation of all the x-axis forces is equal to 0, and summation of fy is equal to 0. It's mean that summation of all the forces that applied in the y-axis is equal to 0. Now this object also have a weight in the downward direction. That is a weight of that object, and this object and the earth are the surface applied a force opposite to this weight. As you know that the earth applied opposite force according to weight. Our weight is along the earth, and the earth applies opposite direction forces along him. So weight is equal to normal forces. So the weight of this object, and this is W, and the normal force is Fn. Now what is limiting friction? As we saw that when the applied force is increases and up to certain limit, then these objects start movement. So the point at which these objects start movement, so this point is called verge point, and in the verge point the friction magnitude is called limiting friction. When these objects reach to the verge point, so then this point the friction is called limiting friction. Limiting friction is the maximum friction force that can develop its surface. It's mean that there is a friction developed, then we have to calculate that how the capability of this friction to oppose the applied force. It's mean that this is a frictional force, and this frictional force have the capability to oppose the applied force. How many applied force can oppose this frictional force? We actually calculate that how the capability of this frictional force to oppose this applied force, and the point at which this applied force can start movement on this object, this point is called verge point. There are many types of friction like static friction, dynamic friction, sliding friction, and rolling friction. So these all have different coefficient of friction. These all have different coefficient of friction. As the roughness increases, as the rough surfaces have greater coefficient of friction. As the roughness increases, the coefficient of friction also increases. Or as the rough surface, when there is a rough surface, so their coefficient of friction is greater. When there is a smooth friction, their coefficient of friction is less. It's mean that rough surfaces is directly proportional to coefficient of friction, and smooth surface is inversely proportional to the coefficient of friction. Now in this lecture we are study about the static friction, that how static friction and how to calculate the coefficient of friction in a static friction. So when frictional force is equal to limiting friction, it's mean that when this frictional force reach to its maximum capability, when this frictional force is reached to a maximum capability at which this body have to start the movement due to applied force, so this point is called limiting friction. This point, the friction is called limiting friction. So when frictional force reach to its maximum capability, this is called limiting friction. Coefficient shows relation between two objects. Coefficient shows relation between these two objects, that how this frictional force is capable to oppose the applied force. So the equation for coefficient of friction is equal to frictional force divided by normal force, or frictional force divided by weight, because weight is always equal to normal to the force. It's mean this is the earth, and this is V, some person. This person can have a weight, so the earth applied same force of that person in the opposite direction. So that's why this person is in the static position in the surface of the earth. Now second condition is